All right, so this is Unit 2, Lecture 3, where we're going to talk about the older brain, the inner brain. Uh, that is very similar to other animals as well. So we're going to talk about the brainstem, the limbic system, other parts of the brain that go with this as well. Again, those of you guys who have taken an anatomy, this is going to be really, really sort of basic stuff here. And those of you guys who may not have the anatomy science background, again, I'm going to put this in a way that is simply about psychology. So it should be pretty understandable to you in how all this works by the time we get done. So again, the question of why do we study the brain here? And again, it's a psychology class. It's not a biology class. It's not an anatomy class. So why are we studying the brain? Well, in order to understand the psychology and how we act, we got to understand how the brain works. Okay. And what's very important, because a lot of people will say, well, everything starts with the brain. It doesn't, because our brains have evolved over thousands of years. And even just your brain alone has evolved through generation after generation after generation of things that have been passed on to you. The brain is simply the last passageway in that particular moment of all these accumulative things have come together and done it. Because if a behavior occurs because of the release of a neurochemical with neurotransmitter Y, it should be considered that this would have occurred due to the secretion of a hormone this morning, where a car stopped in front of you and your adrenaline is going, which might have increased neurochemical Y. Okay, so a hormone that might have happened to you 5 hours ago is impacting what you're going to react to right now. And this may have occurred because the environment in which you were raised either encouraged or discouraged neurochemical Y or even hormone X from even being part of it, or how you respond to it. We don't all respond to things the same way. So that's been our environment that has been shaping our brain. And this may have been a result of the genes that we have that codes for a particular version of that. And I'm not going to have the same genetic makeup that you're going to have, which is going to lead to different chemicals and everything else. And this is due to millennia of factors that shape the evolution of how I ever got to gene Z and why my gene Z is different than your gene C. So, in essence, the brain that we're going to study, your brain in this moment right now, as you're watching this, is the evolution of millions of years, millions of years. And how you're reacting to reading this is the evolution of your entire life, and the fact that you can read it in English as opposed to Arabic or Spanish or whatever else the fact may be. The brain's a huge consumer of the body's energy supply. It's only 3% of our weight is our brain, but it consumes 20% of the energy that we take in. And when you're a young child and it's being shaped and growing, it's 65% of your energy is the brain, which is why when you're younger, you have this desire for junk food and sugar because your brain just needs the energy so much in order to work. So today we're going to talk about the inner brain, the older brain, the very primitive brain that really hasn't changed too much over time. The hypothalamus, the amygdala, the pons, the reticular formation, all this stuff is pretty much the same as it was millions of years ago. And our amygdala is very similar to a cat's, very similar to a rat's, very similar to a gorilla, chimpanzee, whoever else the case may be. We process more information enabling ability to act with foresight, but foresight isn't part of this. This is kind of our reactive brain, our older brain, the brain that, ever since we were, putting flint together to make fire, where this has sort of been. Okay. And ironically, the human brain is actually smaller than what it used to be. And it's got fewer neural connections. It's a more efficient brain. When you take a look at an engine in a Honda today is much different than the engine in a Model T. It's a smaller engine. It's a more efficient engine. It's a more powerful engine. Because sometimes bigger isn't necessarily better, because sometimes bigger is clunkier and it's less efficient. We have a very efficient brain due to millions of years of evolution, some facts on the brain there if you want to pause and take a look. So let's start with the basic anatomy of the brain. And you on your little outline have this graphic right here that you're more than willing or more than welcome to fill in, whether you're willing or not. It's kind of up to you. But anyways, so let's look at the brainstem. The brainstem is basically what we're looking at right here. It's the pons and the medulla together make the brainstem and these parts that are within it. Now, what's important about the brainstem as a whole, even though it's all these parts, as a whole, this is the crossover part of the brain as far as sending the sensory information up or sending the motor information out. This is where the brain sort of crosses over, where the left eye is sent to the right brain, the right eye is sent to the left brain, left eye, right brain, left brain. You get what I'm saying. The fact that my right hand, when I wave my right hand, it's the left side of my brain that controls it, and vice versa. That crossover is happening in the brain stem, which if you wanted to label it would be this area right here on your brain. Now, within the brain stem, we have two main parts. The first part is the medulla. You can call it the medulla oblongata if you would like. This is the base of the brain stem right here. So if your brain's a big piece of cauliflower here, that is your brain stem, and we could label it right down there. Now, the medulla, since it's at the bottom of the brain, this is going to control pretty much automatic functions. Functions that don't have to go up into the brain and be dissected and momentarily, whatever. This is stuff that we consistently do. The heartbeat is controlled by the medulla. Blood pressure, breathing, all controlled by the medulla. And again, these are things that happen automatically, things that we can't control. I can't sit here and go heartbeat faster, heart slow down. I can't consciously control my blood pressure. I can meditate, I can try to calm down, whatever, but I can't consciously control this stuff, really. Vomiting, I put in there some reason that's in the medulla, and cool. One way to remember where the medulla is and what it or what it has to deal with. Medulla sounds like metal. So if you were to put a metal on because you wanted a warrior and I put a metal on, that metal would go right over my heart. So the medulla, heart, lungs, breathing takes care of that. Now the pons is right above the medulla. When we look at the pons, it's this area right here that you see in green. So it's that little sort of if it was a backwards P right there, if the brain was going the other way, it would look like a P that way. This is your pons right above the medulla. Also, automatic functions, pretty much regulating relaxation as well as sleeping. Okay, so when it comes to calming things down, this is the pond. Think pond, placid, relaxing. Also paralysis, that when we go to sleep and we're dreaming, our brain is very active when we're dreaming. And when I'm dreaming of being chased by a lion or whatever, my brain is saying run, 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 run. But my pons has to sort of trap those signals from going down to the rest of my brain. So I'm just sort of paralyzed there, and I'm not telling my body to run around. Now, again, damage to the pond could cause people to act out their dreams, sleepwalk, etc. And this is also why when you wake up immediately in the middle of a dream, and you sort of want to jump up and get out of bed, you can't. You're sort of paralyzed because your pons is still telling your brain, don't send those signals, don't send those motor neurons down to tell my body to do these things. So sometimes when we wake up, there are those moments of sleep paralysis until we can sort of click back on with our brain. So the medulla right down there, your pons right up there. All right. Now, when we go to the next one, which is reticular formation. This is controlling arousal and pattern behaviors, where we sort of see things and how they work. It's very important in waking us up out of a deep sleep, because when we are in a deep, deep sleep, our brain is kind of offline. By the way, if you're labeling it, it's this little jagged thing right in the middle. That's your reticular formation. So when we're asleep, we have a lack of consciousness. Our brain's not really awake. We're not online. We're not doing anything. We're just sort of doing body function. So to be awake and alert and to see things and everything else, I sort of got to shake myself back into it. This is reticular formation. The reticular formation can sometimes get a little bit dazed by patterns when you're driving on a highway and it's just sort of vroom, 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 vroom. You feel your brain go to the Bahamas. It's your reticular formation that goes, whoa, whoa, we got to get back online. So when we suddenly become alerted by something, when something changes, when things aren't in the normal pattern, we look at that. That's a reticular formation. It's one of the reasons we can't multitask. Because these little distractions gain our attention. When you're talking to someone, you're trying to make eye contact, but there's a TV on in the background. You sort of want to glance up to the side. That's your reticular formation. It's drawing you over there. And I want to pay attention. Now, if it's background stimuli that's not important, I'm going to make it minimized. But if it is important, and if it's a lion attacking me out of the corner of my eye, you can just see that lion. I don't know what it is about me and lions here. So again, that's the job of it, tickling. You can't tickle yourself. Unless you have schizophrenia, you can. But you can't tickle yourself because ultimately you control your body. A tickle is, when there's a stimulus there that I can't control, I'm going to pay attention to that because that is looked at as a threat. So your reticular formation is going to look for that particular thing. All right, so that's your reticular formation right there. So we've got the medulla, we've got the pons, we've got the reticular formation all within the brainstem right there. Now, right at the top of the brainstem, right here, which sort of holds everything on top of it, is what is called the thalamus. The thalamus is the hub. This is what everything must go through to go out to the brain. All right, so when I get, my body is getting sort of let's say I'm tasting food. So my tongue is sending sensations through the thalamus to go, okay, where have I had that taste before? The smells are going to, the smells actually pass by the thalamus, but the texture of the food that my tongue is feeling, all these, my hand picking it up, all these things go through the thalamus and go to different parts of the brain to be processed. And at the same time, for me to tell myself to pick up the fork, put it in my mouth, start to chew, those signals are going through the thalamus and sent out to the particular parts of the body of where it needs to go. So everything must go through the thalamus. Every sensation goes through the thalamus, with the exception of smell for some reason, which is also why smell can sometimes be more powerful, is because it's not being diluted by these other things. But the thalamus is the hub. The way that you remember this, and by the way, it's this right up here. If you ever get a connecting flight, most airlines have a hub. Let's say AirTran uses Atlanta, because I want to fly from Houston to Miami, but I'm going to make a stop in Atlanta, change flights and go here because this makes it more efficient. Everything goes through here. So I can take all the messages and send them all here at the same time. So the thalamus is the hub of where everything has to go through to be processed in the brain. Then everything the brain wants the body to do has to go through to send out to the brain. And it sort of organizes all of this stuff that we're doing there. Now the cerebellum, which is back here in both of these, right there and right there. This is at the base of our brain, the very back of our brain right there. The cerebellum is kind of our little brain. This is our automatic brain. This is our muscle memory. This is where your coach says, don't think about it, just do it. Because a lot of people go, well, when I play sports, why do we have to have layup drills? Why do we have to have free throw drills? Why do we have to do all these drills, these play catch, whatever? Because the more times that you practice it again and again, throw the ball, catch the ball, throw the ball, catch the ball, throw the ball, catch the ball, these connections are made down here in your cerebellum. You don't want them up here in the frontal lobe. If you're going to take the free throw, you want to boom, 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 spin, boom, shoot. And you do it the same way every time so it doesn't get caught up here in the frontal lobe. Again, this is why your coach says don't think about it, just shoot. Because if I think about it, it takes an extra quarter of a second to process up here as opposed to just going boom, 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 boom right here. It takes me a little bit of time. And plus, if we get to the frontal lobe, which we'll talk about down the road, the frontal lobe, which is making me worried about what everybody else thinks. I need to just go shoot the free throw because it's the same 15 feet, 10 feet. It's the same thing. But if I start to sit there and think, well, if I hit this, people are going to like me. If I miss it, everyone's going to hate me. I don't want to get all locked up here. I just want to not think about it and just do it. When you start thinking about it, This is where it starts to get up here. And this is where people say the game starts to slow down. You go automatic when you're playing the video game on your controller and you just know how to go to the buttons. You don't think about it because those connections are in your cerebellum. Injuries to this will cause sort of jerky movements, keep us off balance a little bit and things like that. This is automatic stuff. Don't think about it, just do it. That's the cerebellum. When we think about it, it gets up here, it takes longer. When we just do it, it just goes boom, 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 boom. It doesn't get all locked up here and take an extra moment. Okay, now let's talk about the limbic system. The limbic system are these little hippocampus, amygdala, hypothalamus, this little donut-shaped process right here. And we'll throw the pituitary gland in there as well. We'll talk about that more in the next lecture with the endocrine system. But these are the older parts of the brain connecting the newer parts of the brain. So this is where the brain stem and everything else gets connected with all the stuff that's on top of it. This is kind of the bridge between the two. And these things are associated with things like emotion, fear, aggression, drives, desires, all this stuff is locked up in the limbic system. All these things that we see here, emotion, memory, language development, evolution, love, attachment, sexuality, violence, fear, aggression, dreams, hallucinations, amnesia, normal and abnormal behavior, kind of has its roots in the limbic system, which has three parts to it. These three parts make up the limbic system. The first is the hippocampus, which is this guy right around here. If you're doing your little drawing, the hippocampus is memory. Think of memory when you think of hippocampus. This is not where memories are stored. Memories are stored all over the place. The hippocampus is when you're paying attention to what I'm saying right now and deciding what's important. Do I need to take this stuff and send it somewhere? Or where have I heard this before? That's your hippocampus. As I am using language, and I use the word memory with you right now, as I say memory, and that word is in your hippocampus is going to parts of the brain of where have I heard this word before? What other things do I know about memories? What can I attach this to? And it's all coming down to the hippocampus. And then your hippocampus goes, oh, he's saying memory, hippocampus. Now I need to add the word hippocampus to what I know about memories. So to all these things about memory, I'm now sending the word hippocampus out there as well. So the hippocampus is not where memories are stored. It is the place where we send memories to. Think of the hippocampus as a save button on your computer. If you sit there and you type a paper for 15 minutes and then the power goes out, it's gone. You never hit save. This is things that go into your short-term memory, things that you never save. The fact that when you drive to school, you can't remember how you got there. That's your hippocampus. It's throwing stuff away. I don't need it, don't need it. Oh, that I need. That's what your hippocampus does. It is not where memories are stored, but it is the part that goes and grabs old memories, brings them into short-term memory and puts it back into long-term memory. That's your hippocampus, which we'll talk about a lot more when we get to memory and damage to it and things like that. Your amygdala. Your amygdala are these two little almond-shaped guys right here. And I go, well, you only see one. There's one on the left, there's one on the right. These guys right here are the components of emotion. They do not create emotions, but they are sort of the barometer of emotions. When they're stimulated in a certain way, we can get fear, we can get excitement, we can get all these other things, rage, whatnot. When you take the amygdala away, you take emotion away. Sometimes people who are more emotional or more sensitive to certain things, the amygdala is a different size. Put a monkey in a cage where he can watch another monkey with its mate, and his amygdala will become over anxious or oversized and overactive because the anxiety of losing the mate. Jealousy sees a lot of activity in the amygdala. Studies have shown that the larger your amygdala size, the more susceptible you are to fear and anxiety. A lot of times people, and again, I'm not saying good or bad here, but a lot of times people who are conservative voters, you can get conservative voters to vote a certain way when you talk about fear. When you talk about you're going to lose this, they're going to take this away, you're not going to have it, it's not safe, it won't be the same anymore, we need to go back. A lot of times conservative voters have larger and sometimes more active amygdalas because there is a little bit of paranoia that goes with that. And again, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but some studies are starting to show that and prove that people with anxiety tend to have larger, more active amygdalas as well. So again, this is an alarm route. This is an awareness of emotions, not a control center. It's just lighting up. It's a thermometer, barometer, whatnot. The default setting on the amygdala is to trust. We want to trust. Trust is good. But then when we don't trust, and then we got to get bigger, I don't know what I can trust, I don't know what I can't. So we learn over time is different levels of vigilance and different levels of distrust, which kind of affects the amygdala. And it warns us very similar to the DEFCON system, that each, are we close to war? Are we not close to war? It gets some sensory inputs directly are processed to the amygdala. We're going to talk about the prefrontal cortex in the next lecture. And the prefrontal cortex is logic and all these other things. But your prefrontal cortex, which is this part of your brain right here, is the last part to develop. So a lot of times what happens, especially when you're a young teenager, your amygdala is more dominant, and even more when you're 5, 6, or 7. Your amygdala is more dominant than logic, which is why sometimes our emotions, especially when you're younger, can take over. Now, it's great that the amygdala can take these sensory processes directly because sometimes it saves us from a lot of bad things, and it can lead to life-saving actions. We don't sit there and process the danger of going in and saving someone. We just go and we save them. That's the amygdala sort of taking over there. But it can also lead to disastrous mistakes. When you have a police officer, and again, you cannot pay me enough money to be a police officer, to walk up to a car at 2:30 in the morning, whatever. But when you're in this sense of heightened anxiety or whatever, because your life's at risk or whatnot, and you see a person reaching for a cell phone, you mistake it as a gun because that's your amygdala taking over in your prefrontal cortex and other senses not getting, you react immediately, especially when you're a newer officer, and especially when you're in a place of danger all the time. That's your amygdala taking over. This is people with post-traumatic stress disorders tend to have larger amygdalas that are developed as a result of that paranoia. The larger the population we live in, the more reactive of an amygdala we have. Those who live in the city tend to have a more active amygdala than those who don't. Crime fiction was not invented until the 1800s, because prior to the 1800s, everybody lived in the same town. You knew everybody in the town. There was never a question of who did it. But as we got urbanization and as people started to come together, that's where you had crime mysteries. And this is where you had amygdalas start to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. When you compare the amygdalas of people in the 21st century compared to the amygdalas of people in the 8th century, different sizes, different sizes completely there. Charles Whitman, this gentleman right down here, is the person who was responsible, I think it was 1966, in Austin, Texas. He went up to the UT clock tower and just randomly killed 16 people, injured a few more. And behind him, he left a suicide note after this was over, because he knew he was going to die. It was death by cop. He knew he was going to die. And by the way, he had also killed his wife and his mother beforehand, and then went to the clock tower and shot up the place. And he said, would you please, he left a suicide note. He said, would you please do an autopsy? Would you please do an autopsy on my brain? And when the doctors did an autopsy on his brain, what they noticed was about a nickel-sized tumor pressing up against his tiny amygdala. And one of the theories behind why did he shoot all these people, there was no explanation for it. The guy was a Boy Scout. Was it because that tumor was pressing up against his amygdala? Maybe. But what we also have to consider with Whitman, he grew up with an abusive father. He was court-martialed as a Marine for threatening the life of another soldier. He had a history of abuse with his own wife. His brother was murdered in a bar fight at the age of 24. So yes, it could have been pressed against the amygdala. It could have been he knew about abuse because that's what he grew up with. It could have been his environment. It could be that he had similar DNA to his brother, who was also an aggressive person. Might have been the amygdala, might not have been the amygdala, but there was definitely a tumor pressing against it. It's an interesting theory, but we'll never know for sure because he's dead. All right. The hypothalamus is the last part of the limbic system that we're going to talk about here. The hypothalamus is your want center. Hyper, what I want. Okay. And this is everything that I want. I want food. I want sleep. I want whatever. It is the hypothalamus, which is located right here, which tells the rest of the brain to go and get it. And this deals with the pituitary gland, which is right here, which is part of the endocrine system, which we'll talk about more in the next lecture. The endocrine system, or in 2 lectures, the endocrine system talks through hormones to the rest of my body, talks to my stomach, am I hungry? And if it says, yes, I'm hungry, we don't have enough blood sugar, it tells the hypothalamus, hey, we're hungry. And the hypothalamus can instantly go to the fridge and get some food. Okay, so this is all about pleasure. This is all about taking care of what is called homeostasis. I don't want to be too hot. I don't want to be too cold. I don't want to be too hungry. I don't want to be too full. I don't want to be too thirsty. I don't want to be overhydrated. So between the what I want that's being registered by the pituitary gland through the endocrine system, and then my actions to that, the hypothalamus is the want center, the pleasure center. And this can sometimes be overriding. Now, the hypothalamus is also responsible for producing hormones. And specifically, one of the hormones that it produces is a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is part of both the nervous system as well as the endocrine system, because the hypothalamus is not just producing the neurotransmitter signals, but it's also producing these hormones. So it's linked to love. It's a sense of pleasure. It's just feeling good. When we release oxytocin, it's the love feel good. When we hug someone, it's a release of oxytocin. It makes us feel better. Levels rise when we first start to date someone. When we first start to date someone, and just being around that someone just makes us feel good. Higher levels of affection. You want to hold the hand more. A longer lasting relationships, happier couples have high levels of oxytocin. Oxytocin makes us more monogamous. What they did was they took a study of these guys who were in relationships, and they looked at their oxytocin levels. And these gentlemen who had higher oxytocin levels, when they were interviewed by an attractive woman, guys with higher levels of oxytocin, because they were in a relationship, actually sort of kept their distance from the woman, more closed off in their posture and everything else. Guys with lower levels of oxytocin were actually a little bit more interested in this person, not as monogamous with their particular partner. Higher levels in dogs that stared at their owners. Dogs have levels of oxytocin. My dog right now, where's she at? No, she's not around. So I guess lower levels. But this is, animals can have this. It just makes us feel good. When women are pregnant, they start to release higher levels of oxytocin to prepare them for birth, to prepare them for pawning, and all these things. It makes babies more appealing when we have levels of oxytocin. Being around others raises levels, thus making people more pro-social in their actions towards friends. It makes us, but it also, as much as it makes us want to be around our people more, it also makes us more aware of other people. Oh, you're not part of my group. So sometimes oxytocin, as much as it can bring in other people that are part of our group, it also pushes away others. Where Robert Sapolsky here calls it the Teflon hormone. A lot of times, too much oxytocin, we don't realize the bad things going on within our own group. We become more tolerant of our own group, our own religion, our own nation, whatever. It's people who say, hey, forget about America's mistakes because America's wonderful. Yes, I know my particular church has problems, but overall it's wonderful. So we become more tolerant of our own people and our own mistakes, but we become less tolerant of others because you're not part of the group that I love. So as much as it can make us more inclusive, it can also make us more exclusive as well. One other thing here on the hypothalamus and how it can sometimes hijack the rest of our brain. James Old did an experiment with rats. And with these rats, he took this little wire and he was able to connect it up to the rat's hypothalamus. Now, again, how you get to a rat's hypothalamus, microscopic, I don't know. But as much as you can teach a rat to hit a lever and it gets a little pellet of food and it eats the food and learns to hit the lever, whatever, he was able to hook up this rat hypothalamus to this lever. And every time that the rat hit the lever, not only did it hit the want center of the hypothalamus, it hit a specific parts of the want center. And the specific part of the want center that it hit was the sexual gratification part of the hypothalamus. So this rat learned that every time that he hit this lever, it would give him a sensation of gratification each time you hit the lever. No food, no nothing, just that gratification of a sexual release. And he hit this lever and he hit this lever again and again and again. And rats were hitting this lever up to 7,000 times an hour, which is twice a second. So then once the rat learned, I hit this lever, I get this, whatever, then what they did was they put the rat away from the lever and they put an electrified grid. And the question was, how high do we have to crank this electrified grid to stop the rat from wanting to hit that lever to give you that pleasure? And what they discovered was no matter how high they cranked it up, the rat would try to get across, even if it would kill them, even if they saw other rats dead. Now, you did that with food, rats would rather starve than kill themselves to get some food. But when it came to hitting the hypothalamus at that one particular part, rats would kill themselves. So again, some drives can become overwhelming to logic and reasoning and everything else. And sometimes those drives are rooted in our hypothalamus. Okay, so there you go. Other parts of the brain right there and some inner parts of the brain right there. And we'll talk more about outer parts of the brain in your next lecture. Now, we got to get out of here. So I'll talk to you guys on your next one.